Last week, Senator McCarthy appeared on this program to correct any errors he might have thought we made in our report of March 9th. Since he made no reference to any statements of fact that we made, we must conclude that he found no errors of fact. He proved again that anyone who exposes him, anyone who does not share his hysterical disregard for decency and human dignity and the rights guaranteed by the Constitution, must be either a communist or a fellow traveler. I fully expected this treatment. The senator added this reporter's name to a long list of individuals and institutions he has accused of serving the communist cause. His proposition is very simple. Anyone who criticizes or opposes McCarthy's methods must be a communist. And if that be true, there are an awful lot of communists in this country. Earlier, the senator asked, upon what meat does this our Caesar feed? Had he looked 3 lines earlier in Shakespeare's Caesar, he would have found this line, which is not altogether inappropriate. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. No one familiar with the history of his country can deny that congressional committees are useful. It is necessary to investigate before legislating. But the line between investigating and persecuting is a very fine one, and the junior senator from Wisconsin has stepped over it repeatedly. His primary achievement has been in confusing the public mind as between the internal and the external threats of communism. We must not confuse dissent with disloyalty. We must remember always that accusation is not proof, and that conviction depends upon evidence and due process of law. We will not walk in fear one of another. We will not be driven by fear into an age of unreason if we dig deep in our history and our doctrine, and remember that we are not descended from fearful men, not from men who feared to write, to speak, to associate, and to defend causes that were for the moment unpopular. This is no time for men who oppose Senator McCarthy's methods to keep silent, or for those who approve. We can deny our heritage and our history, but we cannot escape responsibility for the result. There is no way for a citizen of a republic to abdicate his responsibilities. As a nation, we have come into our full inheritance at a tender age. We proclaim ourselves, as indeed we are, the defenders of freedom wherever it continues to exist in the world. But we cannot defend freedom abroad by deserting it at home. The actions of the junior senator from Wisconsin have caused alarm and dismay amongst our allies abroad and given considerable comfort to our enemies. And whose fault is that? Not really his. He didn't create this situation of fear. He merely exploited it, and rather successfully. Cassius was right. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves. Good night, and good luck.
And then we call it the wrap-up smear. If you want to talk politics, you call it the wrap-up smear. You smear somebody with falsehoods and all the rest, and then you merchandise it. And then you write it, and they'll say, see, it's reported in the press that this, and this. So they have that validation that the press reported the smear, and then it's called the wrap-up smear. Now I'm going to merchandise the press's report on the smear that we made. And it's a tactic, and it's self-evident.
This dapper fellow is Samuel Chase. He was a member of the Maryland Assembly way back in the 1700s and served in the Continental Congress. He was a signatory to the Declaration of Independence. On an unrelated note, he also had a killer wig. In 1796, George Washington appointed Samuel Chase to the Supreme Court. He served on the court for 8 years until President Thomas Jefferson tried to kick him out. In 1804, Thomas Jefferson pushed to have Supreme Court Justice Samuel Chase impeached. Chase had a volcanic personality. He was seen as an extreme partisan, and leaders in Washington thought Chase was no longer able to make fair decisions on the court. And so Thomas Jefferson orchestrated impeachment proceedings against him. He said that he would wipe the floor with Samuel Chase. Thomas Jefferson did not wipe the floor with Samuel Chase. The impeachment effort failed in the Senate, and Chase remained on the court, despite those concerns that he was too partisan. Appointments to the Supreme Court are for life. There are no takebacks. But the founders granted the Congress the exact same method for removing justices who are deemed to have violated their oaths of office that they granted the first branch of government to use against presidents: impeachment. It even works the same way, starting in the House with a trial in the Senate. In all, 13 federal judges have been impeached in U.S. history, and 8 have been removed, bewigged fashion sense notwithstanding. And joining us now is Michael Beschloss, NBC News presidential historian. Michael, great to have you with us tonight after a very newsworthy day. You know, I think it's instructive because sometimes we do forget that clause in the Constitution that gives the Congress the power to impeach the president also extends to federal officers. And so are we looking at a situation, sort of Samuel Chase moment, where a new Senate, a new House, if Democrats were to take over, could decide that just based on what we know now, what they've heard from Brett Kavanaugh, that perhaps he could be at least challenged as to whether he could keep his current job or the Supreme Court job?
Not impossible. And if you use the example of Samuel Chase, there were 8 counts of impeachment, and he was accused of being too partisan in his decision-making. The Senate cleared him, but the result of that was to say for all of the next 2 centuries, he was the only justice ever impeached, that justices of the Supreme Court can't be partisan, but even more to the point, they have to be independent of the president who appointed them.
Yeah,
and the real problem with Kavanaugh is exactly that.
And that's just where I was going to go with you, because I was taken aback by the sort of rancor, the anger of Brett Kavanaugh, the yelling, the challenging senators.
It was almost psychiatric. It was a primal scream.
It was really unreal to watch, but I was even more taken aback, I have to say, Michael, by the partisanship, the Clinton conspiracy theories, aligning himself with Trump.
Revenge on behalf of the Clintons.
Yeah. Have we ever had a Supreme Court nominee go that partisan in their hearings?
No. The first one to testify at his own hearing was Felix Frankfurter, 1939. You never heard anything like that. Clarence Thomas was supposed to be angry, and he was. Didn't come near to what Kavanaugh said yesterday. He was partisan, and the other danger is he reflected when he was saying maybe this is revenge for the 2016 election. There's a real danger if Kavanaugh goes to the court, he goes to the court as Donald Trump's poodle. He knows that he owes Trump. He spent the last 2 weeks closeted with the Trump people on how to get to the court. You can imagine that Donald Trump basically said to him, you toe the line or I'll rescind your nomination, as he threatened with Neil Gorsuch when Gorsuch was nominated. And so the result is that if Kavanaugh goes on the court feeling indebted to Donald Trump, maybe even afraid of some kind of blackmail over secrets he may have mentioned to the Trump circle, then if you have, let's say, Joy, a case like U.S. versus Nixon, the tapes case of 1974, there were 8 justices, 3 of them appointed by Nixon. They felt independent enough to rule against Richard Nixon. Do you think that Brett Kavanaugh, with all these essentially compromises by his closeness to the Trump administration, he's much closer today than he was a week ago, can he make the same kind of independent ruling? Yeah. I don't think so.
There is also a live question as to whether or not this could be pursued as a criminal matter. There's no statute of limitations for a felony like this in Maryland. This alleged assault is said to have happened in Montgomery County, Maryland. Local authorities in Montgomery County, Maryland now say that while this allegation does pertain to their jurisdiction, the reason they have not yet opened a criminal investigation of this matter is because they have not received a criminal complaint from the alleged victim in this case. I don't know if it will always be that way. Whether or not the White House and Senate Republicans ever get it together to allow the FBI to look into this matter before they try to vote on Kavanaugh as a Supreme Court nominee, even if they did vote on him, and confirm him to the court and he became a sitting Supreme Court justice, there would remain the possibility indefinitely, if Dr. Ford ever wanted to pursue it this way, that she could at any point make that criminal complaint to the police in Maryland, who would not be bound by some expiration of the statute of limitations here. Such a complaint could start a criminal investigation, conceivably of a sitting Supreme Court justice, for felony attempted rape. If law enforcement found that allegation to be substantiated and they found sufficient evidence to bring charges, there is no rule against indicting a Supreme Court justice. There is not even Justice Department policy against indicting a Supreme Court justice the way there is for, say, a president of the United States. And wouldn't that be great for the court?
So there's no question today was a really tough day, but I want to just speak to all of the survivors of sexual assault, and I want to thank you for speaking your truth, for sharing your stories, for having the courage to require people to understand and to hear. And I just want you to remember that your strength, your leadership, your courage is so important, and you will not be silenced. And you deserve to have all of the dignity and respect that you rightly have earned because you spoke out, and your voices have mattered, guys. Your voices have mattered. So we're all in this together. Let's keep the fight going. And thank you. Thank you for everything you do every day and everything you have done.
Actually, in my mind, the Kavanaugh hearing should be postponed.
I will be canceling my appointment with Judge Kavanaugh because I would choose not to extend a courtesy to this president who is an unindicted co-conspirator.
We should not be, right now, confirming any Supreme Court justice.
The Senate Judiciary Committee should immediately pause the consideration of the Kavanaugh nomination.
Jonathan Turley argues Democrats are now laying what he calls a perjury trap for Judge Kavanaugh. In an op-ed entitled "Boofed is the New Bort," Turley says Democrats now argue that Kavanaugh should be denied confirmation or, if confirmed, actually impeached by a later Democratic Congress on the basis of lies about drinking or sexual terms. Let's bring him in, Fox News contributor Jonathan Turley, to discuss. Professor, great to have you with us tonight.
Thank you.
How worried are you that this is the path that we're going down? Because I know in your piece you said this isn't just about getting to what kind of judge he would be. This was putting out statements and potentially putting him in a place where he would have discrepancies or lies about things from his past.
Right. There was a sort of otherworldly feeling about these hearings when you have a U.S. senator going literally through a yearbook and saying, what did you mean when you told your friends this or that? And that really did have the feeling of a perjury trap. You know, what was fascinating about the Democratic questions is that they really didn't press that much on the actual allegations of sexual assault. They kept on trying to get him to define terms that would obviously be quite embarrassing. And the idea being that he could either refuse and say, look, that's just not a very dignified question, which frankly I think he probably should have considered doing, or he might lie, in which point you can say that all this doesn't matter anymore because he lied under oath. If that's going to be the new standard, one can only imagine what the future holds for us.
Yeah, and how many people are going to want to put themselves through that. Nate Silver tweeted this yesterday. Says, I haven't been covering politics for that long, but long enough, 11 years, that I feel entitled to play this card. The position that Kavanaugh was being honest about his drinking is maybe the worst hill to die upon that I've ever seen otherwise smart people try to die upon. But listen, we had people from the beginning who said, we will do, before you even had a name, we'll do whatever it takes to stop this person. So whether it's now about temperament, whether it's about drinking, whether it's about sexual terms, or what he meant on a calendar, is anything too small to go after?
No, because what's being argued here is that the question is whether he lied on any subject. And because the scope of the subject matter has now expanded to the point that it defies definition, anything can be asked of a nominee now. And any answer that is not openly and frankly embarrassing and disclosing of your past could be viewed as perjury. So the question is this what we want from the confirmation hearing? And if it is, what type of people do we expect to get? If everything in your past can be brought up and you can be confronted and demand made for you to answer. Now, what's my greatest concern about all of this is that we're so far removed from the original allegations. You know, originally they were asking about drinking and these terms because there was a reference to his being a blackout drunk. But then it became clear that that was sort of an artificial excuse because they were asking in details for him to, with details as to who he drank with, how he drank, whether he was belligerent. And then you realize that this is really a perjury trap.
Well, and what about the issue of impeachment? I want to play what Congressman Jerry Nadler, a Democrat, who, if they retake the House, as many people think they will, he'd actually be heading up the House Judiciary Committee, and he has been talking about the I word, impeachment. Here's what he said.
If he is on the Supreme Court and the Senate hasn't investigated, then the House will have to. We would have to investigate any credible allegations, certainly of perjury and other things that haven't been properly looked into before.
Well, and a University of Alabama law school professor in the New York Times, a piece entitled "The Case for Impeaching Kavanaugh," says the House Democratic leadership should pledge now that if they win a majority, they will conduct an impeachment investigation to get to the truth. We know only one Supreme Court justice was actually impeached, but the Senate didn't kick him out. What do you think are the odds they go down that path?
Well, you can't count anything out in this environment, but I'm really disappointed to hear these members taking such a reckless path. I was the lead counsel in the last judicial impeachment involving Judge Porteous. It's a terrible process. It's a long one. I have no question in my mind that they would not succeed. But the precedent that they would lay with this type of move would be inherently destructive to our system. The framers created a type of protective zone for our justices. That's why they made impeachment so difficult. You can't reduce their salaries. And if you are impeached, it's generally for something that you've done while in office. Now, if he is confirmed, it means a majority of senators found that they were satisfied with this record. Now, you may disagree with them, but to say that you're going to do a do-over would open up any justice to that type of treatment. Elena Kagan was accused of being either lying or misrepresenting facts in her background, particularly in terms of her work with the healthcare litigation. Now, whether or not that has substance or not, it gives you an example that anyone could claim to have a do-over, and the court would then become vulnerable to political pressure, the very thing the framers wanted us to avoid.
It's all over after that. For example, if it were possible for the Democrats to seize the House, in that event, New York Democratic Congressman Gerald Nadler would be running the House Judiciary Committee, and in that capacity, he has already mused in a number of interviews that he would pursue an investigation of Brett Kavanaugh once he gets the gavel. What we don't know is what that means. What is an investigation of what and into what? Harvard Law professor emeritus and author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, Alan Dershowitz, with that. Alan, very good to have you.
Thank you.
What do you make of what he's getting at here? What would he investigate?
Well, I think there would be a good investigation and a very dangerous investigation. If he looked at the process of confirmation of judicial nominees to try to improve it, that would be a good thing. If he looked at trying to increase the scope of background checks on nominees, for example, have them checked much more extensively before they're nominated, and an ongoing process during the nomination to avoid surprises, that would be a good thing. But if this is an attempt to punish and get even with a judicial nominee who has passed muster with the Senate, albeit in a close vote, it would really undercut the process of confirmation and introduce a new kind of McCarthyism into the process. The idea that that Congress would reinvestigate the sexual allegations, or as some have even suggested, offer impeachment resolutions. First of all, you can't impeach a judge for what he did or didn't do when he was 17 years old. Impeachment operates for what a judicial officer does while serving as a judicial officer, perhaps during the nominating process. But it wouldn't be appropriate to look at whether Judge Kavanaugh committed perjury. That would be something for the Justice Department to look to, not really for Congress. They don't have the skills and the investigative authority to investigate crime. And if
and share our voices with our elected officials. We can do so without fear, without reprisal. What a gift that we were born in this country. God, I pray for the brokenness around us. I pray for the hurt of the women that we have seen here in this building this week. I pray for every single one of them that you will bind up their wounds. God, I pray for the healing balm of Gilead. I pray for them to recognize that Jesus took their pain and that they can give it all to him. And I pray that others will come alongside them and help them to heal. And I pray that our hearts will always remain soft towards them no matter what, no matter how they treat us, no matter how they talk about us, that we will love them in spite of all of it. And God, I thank you for strong and faithful members who are willing to do the right thing even when it's hard. Help us to support them.